The drive up into the Appalachian Mountains was everything we'd hoped it would be. Winding roads through dense, green forests, the sun filtering through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the path. I could feel the excitement buzzing between us as we finally pulled into a clearing surrounded by towering pines, their ancient trunks rising high into the sky. This was the perfect spot, far from civilization, where the only sounds would be the rustling of leaves and the occasional bird call. We couldn't wait to disconnect and lose ourselves in the tranquility of nature. The day passed in a blur of activity, unpacking gear, setting up tents, exploring the surrounding woods. Laughter echoed through the trees as we shared stories, our voices mingling with the sounds of the forest. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of pine needles and damp soil, and for a while, it felt like we had the whole world to ourselves. As night fell, we gathered around the campfire, the warmth of the flames warding off the evening chill. But as the fire crackled and the stars began to appear overhead, I heard it, a faint, almost inaudible whisper drifting through the trees. At first, I brushed it off, thinking it was just the wind, but the sound persisted, growing clearer, more distinct. Emily and Mike didn't seem to notice, too caught up in their conversation, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the whispers weren't just random noise. It was as if the forest was trying to speak to us, trying to tell us something we weren't meant to hear. A shiver ran down my spine, and I found myself glancing into the darkness between the trees, uneasy for the first time since we'd arrived. The second night in the forest felt different, heavier somehow. As the campfire flickered and shadows danced among the trees, the whispers returned, but this time they were clearer, forming vague words that I could almost understand. The sound wasn't just a distant murmur anymore. It was everywhere, surrounding us, making it impossible to tell where it was coming from. It felt like the forest itself was speaking, its voice low and insistent, brushing against my ears with every shift of the wind. The atmosphere grew more unsettling as the night wore on. Emily, usually so lively, had become withdrawn, staring into the flames with a distant look in her eyes. Mike, always the joker, was unnervingly quiet, his eyes constantly darting to the trees as if expecting to see something lurking in the darkness. It was as if the forest had wrapped itself around them, drawing them in, changing them. My unease quickly turned to fear. The whispers were growing more distinct, almost like they were trying to warn us, telling us to leave. I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was alive, watching us, its ancient presence pressing down on me. I suggested we pack up and head back in the morning, but Emily and Mike barely seemed to hear me. They dismissed my concerns with vacant smiles, their expressions oddly blank, as if they were under some kind of spell. That's when the realization hit me. The forest wasn't just whispering. It was influencing them, seeping into their minds and twisting their thoughts. The longer we stayed, the harder it became to think clearly, as if the forest was slowly pulling us into its grasp. I could feel it tightening around me, and I knew we had to get out before it was too late. By the third night, the whispers had changed. They weren't just vague warnings anymore. They were commands, harsh and unyielding, echoing in my mind. The words were clear now. "You will never leave." Each time I heard it, my chest tightened with dread. The forest wasn't just trying to scare us. It was claiming us. Emily and Mike were no longer the friends I knew. Their eyes were glazed over, their faces expressionless, and they spoke in strange, monotone voices, repeating the whispers as if they were coming from deep within their minds. They wandered aimlessly around the camp, mumbling the same eerie phrases over and over, their voices blending with the whispers from the trees. It was like they had become part of the forest, their thoughts consumed by its ancient, malevolent presence. I couldn't take it any longer. I had to get out. I told them we needed to leave, but they just stared at me blankly, as if my words didn't reach them. Panic surged through me and I decided to run. But as I moved, the forest seemed to close in around me, the trees towering higher, their branches twisting and intertwining, forming a dense barrier that blocked my path. The once spacious forest now felt suffocating, the trees pressing in on me from all sides, their bark rough and cold against my skin. I pushed through, desperate to find a way out, but every path I took seemed to lead me deeper into the forest. The terrain grew more treacherous, the ground uneven and thick with roots that tripped me at every turn. The trees themselves seemed to shift, their trunks bending and warping, guiding me further into the heart of the woods. It was as if the forest was alive, its ancient will determined to keep me within its grasp. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, echoing in my mind. "You belong to us now." My thoughts were slipping away, becoming jumbled, as if the forest was reaching into my mind, pulling me deeper into its control. I realized with horror that this was the forest's true nature. It preyed on those who stayed too long, absorbing their thoughts, their identities, until they became nothing more than whispers among the trees. The forest wasn't just a place. It was a trap, an ancient, malevolent presence that thrived on the minds it ensnared. And now it had me, at last. In a desperate bid for freedom, I broke into a run, tearing through the dense undergrowth as the whispers rose to a deafening roar. The forest seemed to come alive, its trees shifting and twisting, their roots rising from the ground to trip me, their branches reaching out like claws to drag me back. Every step was a struggle, the trees closing in around me, forcing me deeper into the heart of the woods. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my mind was a blur of fear and desperation. The whispers were everywhere, their voices mingling with those of Emily and Mike, now fully part of the forest, urging me to give in, to accept my fate. "You'll never leave," they chanted, the words echoing in my head until I could barely think straight. The forest was no longer just around me. It was inside me, filling my thoughts, consuming my will to fight. My strength waned, and I stumbled, the ground rushing up to meet me as I collapsed in exhaustion. The trees loomed above, their branches entwining around me like a cage, their rough bark pressing against my skin. The whispers grew louder, drowning out everything else, until they were all I could hear, all I could feel. My memories began to fade, my sense of self slipping away, replaced by the forest's insistent voice. As darkness closed in, the last remnants of my identity were swallowed by the forest, my thoughts becoming one with the whispers. The world around me disappeared, leaving only the endless, ancient trees and the soft, insidious murmurs of those who had come before me. The forest stood serene and unchanged, the only sign of what had transpired the faint, eternal whispers of those it had claimed, now including me. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon as Eric and I made our way through the dense, shadowy forests of the Pacific Northwest. The hike had been peaceful, almost meditative, until we stumbled upon an overgrown trail that seemed to beckon us deeper into the woods. Curiosity got the better of us, and we followed it, pushing through thick underbrush until we emerged into a forgotten campground. The place was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes you feel like you've stepped into another world. Dilapidated cabins slumped under the weight of time, their windows shattered and roofs caved in. A rusted playground stood in the middle of the clearing, its swings swaying gently as if moved by an unseen hand. Everything about the place screamed abandonment, yet something in the air felt heavy, as if the past still lingered here. "This is perfect," Eric said with a grin, already unpacking our gear. "It's like we've found our own little piece of history." I wasn't so sure. As we explored, we found old photos, journals, and scattered belongings left behind by campers long gone. The journals were the most unsettling. Entries detailing strange noises, sightings of shadowy figures in the woods, and, most disturbingly, tales of people disappearing without a trace. Each page felt like a warning, but Eric brushed it off as just campfire stories meant to scare kids. But as the sun dipped lower and the shadows grew longer, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air was too still, the quiet too deep. I tried to voice my concerns, but Eric just laughed, calling me a worrier. Yet, deep down, I knew this place held secrets, and I wasn't sure we were welcome here. The deeper we explored the abandoned campground, the more unsettled I became. The old photos we found were the first real sign that something was off. They showed groups of campers posing by the lake, around campfires, or on the playground, all of them smiling as you'd expect. But there was something in their eyes, something that didn't match their cheerful expressions. A flicker of fear, as if they knew something they couldn't speak of. The more I looked at them, the more that fear seemed to leap off the paper, as if trying to warn us. Then there were the journal entries. At first, they were typical camp notes, descriptions of hikes, campfire stories, and friendships formed. But as we read further, the tone shifted. The entries became frantic, the handwriting erratic. One journal spoke of an ominous presence that seemed to follow the campers wherever they went. They described hearing footsteps at night, always just out of sight, and feeling eyes on them even when they were alone. The final entries mentioned children who appeared in the night, their forms barely visible in the darkness, who led campers into the woods. Those who followed were never seen again. By the time night fell, I was on edge, every rustle of leaves or creak of wood making my heart race. We set up our tent near one of the old cabins. But as we settled in, strange things began to happen. I heard faint whispers outside, so soft they could have been the wind, but something about them felt deliberate, like someone or something was trying to speak to us. Shadows flitted between the trees, just beyond the reach of our flashlight, their movements quick and unnatural. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, clutching Eric's arm. He shook his head, unconcerned. "It's just your imagination, Camila. This place is creepy, sure, but it's just an old campground. We're probably the first people here in years." I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. We eventually lay down to sleep, but I couldn't relax. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I was being watched, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me. I lay awake, listening to the forest around us, half expecting those ghostly children to appear at the edge of our camp. Sleep didn't come easily, and when it finally did, it was filled with uneasy dreams. I woke with a start, my heart pounding in my chest. The tent felt strangely empty, and when I reached out for Eric, I found only crumpled blankets. Panic surged through me as I sat up, frantically calling his name. The night was eerily quiet, too quiet. Only the soft rustling of trees answered me. I scrambled out of the tent, my breath visible in the cool air, calling out for Eric over and over again. My voice echoed off the abandoned cabins, but there was no reply. The fear that had been creeping in since we arrived now settled in fully, heavy in my chest. Something wasn't right, and I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. As I moved through the deserted campground, the silence was shattered by a fleeting movement in the distance. Something small and pale flickering between the trees. I froze, my blood turning to ice. It was a child, or at least something that looked like a child, but its form was hazy, almost translucent, as if it was barely there. The figure turned, its hollow eyes locking onto mine, and then it moved deeper into the woods, disappearing into the shadows. A second later, I saw another flicker, then another. More ghostly children, all drifting away from the campground. Terror gripped me, but I was desperate to find Eric. Ignoring the pounding in my head, I followed the children, my feet crunching on the forest floor as I ventured farther from the campground. The deeper I went, the more disoriented I became. The trees seemed to shift around me, their branches twisting unnaturally, like they were alive and bending to block my way. The path I had followed moments ago now seemed completely foreign, and no matter which way I turned, I felt like I was being herded, drawn deeper into the darkness. The whispers grew louder, filling my head with strange, unintelligible words that sent shivers down my spine. I could feel the presence from the journals now, closing in, as if it was watching me from the shadows, waiting for me to make a mistake. But I couldn't stop. My desperation to find Eric pushed me forward, even though every instinct screamed at me to turn back. The ghostly children were leading me somewhere dangerous, but I was powerless to resist, driven by a primal need to save him. Even as my surroundings twisted and the presence closed in around me, I followed, hoping against hope that I wasn't already too late. I stumbled into a clearing deep in the woods, my heart racing with fear and exhaustion. There, in the middle of the clearing, stood Eric, but something was terribly wrong. His eyes were vacant, empty of the spark I knew so well, as if his soul had been drained away. He stood motionless, surrounded by the ghostly children, their pale faces blank, their hollow eyes fixed on me. "Eric!" I called out, my voice trembling with desperation, but he didn't respond. Instead, he began to chant in a language I couldn't understand, his voice low and eerie, blending with the whispers that had haunted us since we arrived. The ghostly children moved closer, their expressions emotionless, as they formed a tight circle around us, trapping us in the clearing. I lunged for Eric, trying to shake him out of the trance, but his body was cold, unresponsive. The presence I had felt all night surged around me, a malevolent force that pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The reality of our fate hit me like a wave. I had lost him, and now we were both lost to this place. The whispers grew louder, drowning out my thoughts as the forest seemed to close in, consuming us both. My vision blurred, and the last thing I heard was our voices joining the chorus of the damned, our identities fading into the darkness. We were now part of the campground's dark history, our souls trapped forever in the forgotten woods, doomed to haunt them for eternity. The drive up to the Rocky Mountains was filled with laughter and music, the excitement palpable as we left behind the stresses of college life. We were finally here, miles from civilization, surrounded by towering trees and the crisp, fresh air of the mountains. After searching for the perfect spot, we found it. A secluded clearing near a small, tranquil lake, the water shimmering under the midday sun. Felt like we'd discovered our own little paradise. The first day passed in a blur of activity, hiking through the rugged trails, cooling off with a swim in the lake, and setting up camp as the sun dipped behind the peaks. By evening, we were gathered around a crackling campfire, the warmth of the flames warding off the chill of the mountain air. The world outside felt a million miles away, and for the first time in ages, I felt completely at peace. But as we sat there, sharing stories and roasting marshmallows, something caught my eye. A shadowy figure standing far off in the woods, just beyond the reach of the firelight. It was too far to make out any details, but it was definitely there, watching us. My heart skipped a beat as I pointed it out to the others, but when they looked, the figure had vanished, leaving nothing but darkness. "Probably just a trick of the light," Eric said with a chuckle, the others nodding in agreement. They laughed it off, but the image of that figure stuck with me, a nagging unease settling in the back of my mind. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was nothing, but the sense that we weren't alone lingered long after the fire had died down. The next morning, I tried to push the memory of the figure from my mind, convincing myself it was just a trick of the shadows. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every time we went hiking or sat by the lake, I caught glimpses of it. A dark figure standing at the edge of the forest, just watching. It never moved closer, never made a sound, but it was always there, lingering at the edge of my vision. Each time I saw it, I'd point it out to the others, my voice tinged with growing urgency. But by the time they turned to look, the figure had vanished, swallowed by the dense trees. "Miles, you're seeing things?" Laura said, her tone half joking, half concerned. The others nodded, more focused on enjoying the trip than worrying about shadows in the woods. They dismissed my concerns, laughing them off as paranoia brought on by the isolation. But the figure kept appearing, its presence gnawing at my nerves. I started to feel paranoid, my thoughts spiraling as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Tension grew within our group. Some, like Eric, were adamant that we should stay and finish the trip, while others began to share my unease, whispering about whether we should pack up and leave. I felt increasingly isolated, my friends' dismissive responses making me doubt my own sanity. Was I really seeing this figure, or was my mind playing tricks on me? The more I tried to convince them that something was wrong, the more distant they seemed, their laughter and casual conversations feeling like a barrier between us. As the sightings continued, so did the arguments, the easy camaraderie of our first day fading into unease and mistrust. And all the while, the figure kept watching, a silent, unsettling presence that refused to leave. On our final night in the mountains, the air was thick with tension. The easy laughter of the first day was long gone, replaced by uneasy silence and the occasional argument. I hadn't seen the figure all day, and a small part of me hoped it was finally over. But as darkness fell and we gathered around the campfire one last time, I felt it, a creeping dread that made my skin crawl. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it again. This time, the figure was much closer, standing just beyond the ring of firelight. My breath caught in my throat as it stepped out from the shadows, its presence more real, more menacing than ever before. The firelight flickered, casting its long, dark shadow across the ground, and I could see its eyes, cold and unwavering, locked onto mine. Before I could speak, the figure did. Its voice was low, gravelly, and haunting, the words sending a chill straight to my core. "Leave now." The command was direct, urgent, unlike anything I had experienced before. There was no mistaking the warning. This wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was real, and it was telling us to go. Terror surged through me, and I didn't hesitate. "We need to leave. Now," I urged, my voice shaking with fear. My friends saw the panic in my eyes, and, for the first time, they believed me. The mood shifted instantly from disbelief to urgency. We scrambled to gather our belongings, the fear palpable as we tore down our tents and threw everything into the car. The figure stayed at the edge of the camp, watching us silently as we hurriedly packed up. As we drove away, the forest loomed around us, dark and foreboding. The tension in the car eased slightly as we put distance between us and the campsite. But then, an eerie howl echoed through the woods, freezing us in place. It was a sound that was both animalistic and otherworldly, a final reminder of the danger we had narrowly escaped. We drove faster, leaving the mountains behind, but the memory of that figure and its chilling warning stayed with us, haunting our thoughts long after we were safe. We didn't stop driving until the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon. The tension in the car was thick, everyone too shaken to speak, the events of the night replaying in our minds. When we finally reached the safety of a small town miles away, we parked and just sat there, catching our breath. We were unharmed, but the fear still clung to us, a stark reminder of how close we had come to something. Later that day, we learned that a dangerous predator, a bear or possibly a mountain lion, had been spotted in the area where we had been camping. The realization hit me hard. That figure, whatever it was, had warned us just in time, saving our lives. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. If we hadn't left when we did, we might have become its prey. But as relieved as I was, I couldn't shake the questions that gnawed at me. Who or what was that figure? Was it a person, a spirit, or something else entirely? The way it appeared and vanished, the urgency in its voice, it didn't fit into any explanation I could come up with. As we drove back to campus, I found myself staring out the window, lost in thought. I was grateful for the warning, but the mystery of the watcher in the woods haunted me. I knew I'd never forget those eyes in the dark, or the voice that had pulled us back from the brink. The mountains receded into the distance, but the memory of that night stayed with me, a reminder that some questions might never have answers.